incidents that you know of so far?
It was 220 or something so far.
Awesome.
We had more than 350 people registered, so we'll see who else
Gotcha.
shows up.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know a lot of folks trickle in,
Me
kids
too.
and everything that might come later in the day.
Good morning. We're going to get started with our last talk of the morning in here. So come on in, have a seat. I would like to introduce Velizar Demirev. And he is, for the past 4 years, he's worked at Cloud Storage Security, supporting customers, researching security, and doing anything that's needed to help keep the company moving. And with that, I will turn it over to Velizar.
Thank you. Oh. Perfect.
Almost forgot. We want to give him a little gift for speaking, too. Here you go.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. Today, we'll be covering a little bit about object storage, incidents related to anything object storage related in the cloud, and just putting a plan around forensics for it. So real quick, my name is Velizar. I went to RIT. I've worked in the cybersecurity space and just startups in general for a while ever since going to RIT. Right now, I'm at CSS, Cloud Storage Security, as CTO, doing just about anything that's needed day to day. At CSS, we build software that is used for malware protection, as well as we're building something new coming up soon for the data layer to protect your data in the cloud. We also have an internal threat lab that we recently started called Casmer Labs. So we're doing a lot of research as well on threats in the cloud related to the storage layer. So for today, we're going to break this down into two different parts. The first is we'll talk a little bit about putting together a forensic plan through the lens of the NIST 861 R3 framework. And then we'll actually also talk about putting that plan to use in AWS, Azure, and GCP. So just to get an idea here, how many of y'all use object storage? So S3, oh wow, that's quite a few. Yeah, everyone, indeed. Who doesn't these days? One of the things we've noticed is that organizations have a lot of assets in the cloud, and they have hundreds, thousands of buckets, so it's heavily used. And a lot of the time, it's also multi-cloud. There's really one golden rule that I like to stick to, and that's regardless of the objects, whatever they may be, file types, however they get there, the golden rule is they should only be accessible by anyone who's authorized to access them. And that's not always so easy at the end of the day. Over 60% of data now is stored in some type of cloud. And that number continues to grow year after year. Breaches for data, about 40% last year, according to IBM, were cloud-based. And based on our own internal research through our threat lab, over 40% of organizations have fallen victim to some type of ransomware attack. And we'll talk about it a little bit later on. Ransomware meaning both files that create some kind of ransomware attack at the endpoint, but also the storage volumes themselves being victim to ransomware. So everybody's shifting their focus towards data when it comes to attackers. And as you can see, the the consequences are always in the news. Day after day, we see folks having some type of breach, some type of leak, whether it's due to a bucket becoming public accidentally, due to misconfiguration, or it's due to some type of malware being uploaded into the bucket and ending up downstream on an employee's device or customer's device, so on and so forth. It's always in the news. You continue to see this time and time again. When we talk about the cloud, it's important to remember that all of these different platforms have some level of shared responsibility, where the cloud provider is focusing on the infrastructure, so the hardware, as well as the software side, and you as the customer need to focus on actually configuring the different software properly, as well as focus on what you're actually storing on that infrastructure. So it's your responsibility at the end of the day, and this is just an example from the AWS side, but Azure, GCP, all of these different platforms have something similar, where at the end of the day, you're responsible for knowing what you're storing in the cloud. All right, so let's dig into this a little bit. The NIST framework, the 861 R3 framework, is focused on forensics. Before we do so, though, I do want to get a little bit into what types of threats to expect when you're dealing with cloud storage. And it mainly focuses on 3 different areas. The first is malware uploads. So when it comes to malware, usually you think of it as downloading some malware on your computer, but a lot of the time when it comes to cloud storage, there's that downstream risk. Even if a file is not executable in an S3 bucket, for example, the downstream risk that it creates is the real threat. If that file ends up on your machine, your customer's machine, your partner's machine, whoever it may be in your organization or outside of your organization that's accessing the file downstream, that's a big problem. A lot of folks say, well, I have endpoint protection on my devices. Why do I need to worry about this? Well, not every single piece of, or I should say, not every single vendor, antivirus vendor, is going to be able to catch every single threat. There's no guarantee as well that everyone that accesses these files has some type of protection on their devices. So the key is you want to scan for malware at the source as it's uploaded. So that's number 1. 2 is misconfiguration. So especially if you have a lot of buckets like we've seen here, everybody, it looks like, has something somewhere in a bucket in the cloud stored. Misconfiguration is really easy to fall victim to. We're all human at the end of the day, and human error is big when it comes to cloud storage, and that's what we found at the end of the day. So making sure that whatever you're storing is properly set up, properly configured both at the object level as well as the storage volume level is something that you'll need to make sure to focus on. And then, last but not least, ransomware intrusion. So, like we talked about, you should expect ransomware both at the object level, the device level, as well as the storage volume level. So those are just the 3 things I want you all to keep in mind as we go through this today. All right, so the NIST framework, it's broken down into 2 different pieces, which we'll talk about here. The first part of it focuses on preparation before an incident occurs, and the second part of it focuses on the incident response itself after an incident occurs. So it's split out into these 2 sides. On the preparation side, it's broken down into 3 pieces: govern, identify, protect, as well as on the incident response side, it's detection, response, recovery. And I should note, by the way, the revision 3 of this NIST framework actually released this cybersecurity 2.0 framework. So this is the latest as of last year. So let's talk a little bit about preparation when it comes to this framework here. The first step of it is governance, and that's really going to vary based on each organization, based on each team, based on you as a team member in an organization. You are responsible for setting everything related to priorities in terms of incident response, in terms of what your tolerance is for a threat, and as well communication as far as internal communication to team members, whether it's your security team, your legal team, your executive team, whoever it may be, as well as external communication to your customers and whoever you're working with externally. So governance is unique. They mention it very specifically, but keep in mind it's going to be unique to your organization. It's just something that you and your organization are going to have to be responsible for. Identify. So keeping an inventory of all of your assets, all of your buckets, all of your storage volumes that you have in the cloud is going to be crucial in order to prepare for some type of incident. Not everybody has an idea of all of the storage volumes that they have. We run into it a lot of the time where a customer just doesn't know that they have some level or some set of buckets or storage volumes in a specific region in AWS, for example. And they'll discover them and they'll say, well, that's not supposed to be there. So having proper inventory is a crucial part of planning. And then protect. So implementing defenses. So proper configuration goes miles and miles. Things like proper access control, having encryption enabled, it's really crucial at the end of the day as part of that preparation. As far as incident response goes, so after an incident occurs, the first piece to this framework is detect. So you want to be able to have something in place to monitor for anomalies. Usually a SIEM or SOAR type tool like Splunk, for example, is great for that because you can aggregate all your logs into an alert for specific activity. When a incident is detected, you'll want to isolate and eradicate. So the response piece of this is broken down into two different sides. There's the action that you take to isolate the threat, to stop it in its tracks. But in the framework itself, it states that you need to have clear communication. So this kind of goes back to that governance side of you want to make sure that you're communicating with your team internally and externally as well to your customers. And then recovery. The last part is, like we all probably know, backups, making sure that you have proper backups and are prepared for an incident, making sure that if you do backup, that the data, you verify the integrity of the data. And as part of that recovery process, the second part, I should say, because I would break this down into two different parts. The second part is you want to perform some type of analysis on what happened to learn from it, figure out how it happened, so on and so forth. So we'll get into it a little bit more here. When it comes to preparation, it's broken down, again, into these two different sides. Identification of threats. It could be things like misconfiguration, so a public bucket, a bucket that might not be public, but the objects in them, some of them are configured to be public, so on and so forth. Permissions, overly permissive actions, so a user may have permissions that they may not necessarily need at the end of the day. No encryption, either at rest or in transit. And then your backups being vulnerable. So we'll get into it a little bit more as well on the backup side, but again, keep in mind, ransomware could be a big issue both at the object level and the backup level. As far as protection goes, and to protect yourself against threats as part of the preparation process, you want to have proper access control, you want to encrypt, and you want to have backups that folks can't change. So let's talk about this some more here. When it comes to the detection, like we talked about, you want to have a SIEM tool for alerting. And it's really a matter of, is someone doing what they're not supposed to be doing? So is a user account performing some type of action that they're not supposed to, whether it's during the daytime hours or nighttime hours or whenever. Along with that, that ties into monitoring for behavior and misconfigurations. A lot of it we'll get into here. I'll just skip by that. There we go. When it comes to after an incident occurs, it's broken down into 4 pieces, like we talked about. So isolation, if there is something that occurs, you'll want to go through and figure out what the source of that incident was. Was it internal? Was it external? You'll want to figure out, does it apply to one bucket or multiple buckets or multiple storage volumes? It could be permission-based. It could be a lot of things. If it's malware related, you'll want to quarantine that malware away from whatever production bucket that file was uploaded to. So that way, you eliminate that downstream risk. And then if you have governance policies in place, again, you want to communicate, and you want to document everything at the end of the day. So as part of the post-incident actions, again, restoring data, performing some type of forensics on that data as part of your plan based on this NIST framework is crucial, and just reviewing it, doing some type of postmortem. Again, key takeaways here that I want you all to remember is in the cloud, you have a shared responsibility. You are responsible for the data, for how things are configured. You always want to be aware of new threats, and you always want to have some type of plan in place if the worst were to occur, and backups at the end of the day. So let's get into a little bit about actually taking this plan and implementing it in a cloud platform. So some of these threats that we have, so malware uploads. Usually you have some type of application or web form or whatever it may be that may be accepting data and allowing your users to upload that data into a storage volume. An attacker, and it may be an attacker, it may just be someone that is unsuspecting that has a infected file, is going to upload that file, and you may or may not have malware protection at that point. If that file gets in, it creates that downstream risk. If it gets in, it can't be executed in S3 or in your storage volume, thankfully, at least, your object storage volume. But that downstream risk is where things get a little ugly. Usually, when you have some type of malware that's uploaded, the biggest challenge is going to be identifying what the source was, who uploaded it. If you have an application, you might be scrolling through application logs to figure out who it was from, or was it a user, was it someone that shouldn't be uploading things, so on and so forth. The big thing to consider is with this type of threat, there's two ways to think about it. One is you can scan files after they've been written to a storage volume, and I should note, not after they've ended up on someone's machine, but after they've been written to a storage volume. Or you'll need to decide, do you want to scan before they ever get to the storage volume? And that's a personal decision. We run into a lot of customers that try it one way and then they'll switch to the other. Usually they'll attempt to scan after the file is uploaded to a storage volume, and they'll find it doesn't work for their application. It doesn't work for their workflow. So they'll switch to having the application send the file to an API endpoint, have the scan performed on that endpoint and the result returned, and based on that result, they can upload the file to your bucket. So just things to consider. As far as misconfiguration goes, the biggest thing here is going to be not only figuring out who caused the misconfiguration, but it's what was actually accessed. Was anything sensitive accessed? You're gonna need to figure that out, and fairly quickly. There was one example I can think of, a company that somehow exposed all of their job application data, so resumes and whatever else, in a public bucket, and they didn't discover it until a kind researcher pointed it out. So you'll always want to make sure that if something's public and it's due to a misconfiguration, who is identifying all of that data, or who is identifying who is accessing all of that data. And then as far as ransomware attacks go, so breaking it down again on the file side, if it's an infected file with some ransomware, that's one side. And then if the storage volume itself, the objects within them are locked up, it's going to be, it's going to be crucial to recognize what happened. Earlier this year, there was a threat called Codefinger that was uncovered, I think in January. And this Codefinger threat applies to S3 buckets, where if someone were to gain access to your AWS credentials, they could log in, which it's fairly rare but still a threat. They could log in and they can use customer provided keys or apply customer provided keys to all of your objects within your bucket. So they lock up all of your objects, and even worse, they'll use lifecycle rules to delete the files after, let's say, 7 days. And then they'll just leave you a little ransom note in there that will give you some instructions to pay them or else. So if it's a threat like that, main focus is going to be what actually happened. What user was it? What API calls were made to set up those customer provided keys? So just things to keep in mind here. All right. When it comes to the AWS services themselves, within AWS, out of the couple of hundred different services that they offer a handful related to logging and monitoring as a whole. The first is CloudTrail. So CloudTrail allows you to look through all of the different API calls for just about any type of activity, whether it's object storage related or not. And it's a great service to get into after an incident has occurred to see what actually happened at the object level, because a lot of the time it's kind of broken down. CloudTrail focuses on the actual objects, whereas the actual back and forth, the network traffic piece of it is through S3 access logs and VPC flow logs. So you'll want to note all of these different services here as different types of actions are taken. There's also CloudWatch and GuardDuty. CloudWatch is great as far as storage goes, storage metrics go, really high-level storage metrics. Let's say if you have a bucket that might have a little bit of data, or on all of your buckets, let's say you have monitoring through CloudWatch, you could alert for if files are being written to this bucket way too fast. If there's a sudden increase, you could alert for that using CloudWatch. But otherwise, it's not that great for anything low level. And then AWS also offers GuardDuty as well for not only anomaly detection, but also for malware scanning. So they actually recently introduced malware scanning to their product, to their GuardDuty product last year. So it allows you natively to scan for malware. Now, it's a little bit limited, but it's a really good, good native tool to use as well. Within Azure, Azure is a little bit less, it seems like, but you have Azure activity logs and resource logs. You can use those for access tracking to figure out who accessed what. Azure has their own malware solution called Defender for storage, and it also, from what we saw and used, it also has some anomaly detection features as well, functionality as well. And then in GCP, GCP has cloud audit logs for storage access, so see who accessed what within your storage volumes. There's VPC flow logs as well in GCP, so for network traffic tracking. And then Chronicle, or formerly titled Chronicle, I guess now it's Google Security Operations, and soon to be Wiz, probably inside of Google Security Operations. No? No? But they have Google Security Operations, which you can use for log analysis and tracking and so on and so forth. So the thing I want y'all to keep in mind here is it's really a few different levels. One is you want to take into consideration the network level and see what happened as far as the back and forth on the network side. And all of these different platforms provide native tools that allow you to do that. The second is at the storage volume and object level, what actually happened when you're trying to access or edit configuration or an object on a storage volume through the API. So there's tools to allow you to do that. And then the third piece is the actual analysis and alerting. All of these different platforms have some type of native anomaly detection. Or use Wiz, you never know. So when it comes to attack patterns, when you're looking at these logs, there's a few things you'll want to note. One is unusual API calls. So is something happening within your buckets? Is someone calling the S3 API and trying to list buckets and then access buckets or access files or update files, update objects, or delete objects, even worse. You'll always want to have some type of monitoring in place for that. Along with that, large data transfers is another big piece. We've been building at CSS a new tool, like I mentioned earlier, that will focus on this data layer. And one of the things that we are ideating on is this concept of impossible travel. So if you do business, let's say, mainly in the US, AWS regions, and someone tries to write files to a bucket in APAC, for example, that's this concept of impossible travel. Like, no one should be using any resources in a region outside of the main ones that y'all have. Along with that, as far as anomalous activity, the source of whatever is happening. So do you mainly do business in the US? Do you only have people in the US that are logging into your AWS accounts? Well, if someone logs in from the UK or Germany or wherever else, that might be a problem, unless you have someone there that's traveling there, for example. So you'll always want to look out for different types of activity, whether it's strange API calls, strange data transfers, especially late at night, as well as where's everybody accessing AWS from, where's everybody accessing these buckets from, so on and so forth. Yeah. So last piece here. Let's talk a little bit about playbooks as far as incident response goes. When it comes to malware uploads, it's really, really crucial to quarantine any type of object that's found to be infected. If you don't, that's fine. I mean, it's up to y'all. It's up to you and your organization to figure out the risk tolerance that y'all have. But when you quarantine something, you're eliminating that downstream risk until you can figure out, is this file infected? What is this file all about? Who is it from? So on and so forth. So the first piece, as far as malware upload incident response, and for any playbooks that y'all have, is quarantine the file. Second is figure out who it's from. So is it from an unknown public source? Is it from a customer? Is it from someone internal? So on and so forth. And then perform analysis on it. So within our anti-malware solution at Cloud Storage Security, we have static and dynamic analysis functionality available, where you can send the file off to our cloud sandbox and detonate the file and receive a report that says, here's what the file's trying to do, the directories it's trying to access, what it's trying to execute, the IP addresses it's trying to connect to, so on and so forth. So performing some type of additional analysis on the file is crucial in order to understand, is it legitimately infected? Something to keep in mind as well. Every single scanning engine has different virus signatures that are going to be different every single day. And malware is going to evolve every single day. So the malware of today, the virus signatures of today are going to be drastically different 6 months from now, a year from now, so on and so forth. So making sure that you are performing that additional analysis is crucial, because it could be a false positive. But it could be a false positive today, and you might find that the file is legitimate and send it back to production. But if you decide to send it back, also remember to continuously rescan files in any of your storage volumes. So having some type of baseline created on a regular frequency, like every 6 months or every quarter, whatever it may be, is crucial as well. As far as misconfiguration goes, if you have a public bucket, first step, usually lock it down. Get the bucket and all of its objects to be non-accessible. Along with that, if it's an incident, if it's part of your governance policies, you'll want to notify your stakeholders, internal, external, your legal team possibly as well. usually as part of the eradication threat, or eradication step, I should say, in your playbook, you'll want to identify, figure out what exactly was exposed, like we talked about earlier. Usually look at access logs to see who accessed what, if possible, and figure out if this bucket, if this storage volume was public, was it genuinely accessed, or did you get away clean and no one accessed it, thankfully, hopefully. And then the biggest piece that we found with misconfiguration incidents is you're going to want to notify folks that their data was publicly accessed. As far as ransomware goes, if it's something like a code finger threat where you have someone accessing your AWS account, locking up your files, it's going to be crucial to shut that account down if possible, especially if they have AWS CLI access and things like that. You'll want to figure out what was compromised and if you can get it back, if possible, hopefully you can get it back. And then restore data from backups as part of any playbook that you have responding to a ransomware incident, especially one that's like a code finger incident. Yeah, that's mainly it for today. Thanks everybody for coming by. Thank you to the organizers as well for putting this on. Any questions at all from anybody? Yes. Oh, the slides, so we will put them on our website, cloudstoragesecurity.com, and they'll be accessible there. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you have any kind of in-depth experience with the guard duty S3 malware?
Yes. So as far as the Guard Duty S3 malware protection tool goes, they released it, I want to say June of last year, middle of last year. It's a good tool overall. It uses the Bitdefender scanning engine, but it has some limitations. So you can only scan files, I believe, up to 5 gigabytes in size. You can, and maybe they removed this recently, but you can scan, I believe, up to 10 buckets at a time, which I'm not sure why. And the biggest thing that I found interesting, at least, was when you are sending your files off for scanning, the files are being scanned in AWS accounts that AWS owns. So it's not being scanned in your own account, but in their accounts, which is, it's fine, but if you have data residency requirements, things like that, that you need to abide by, you'll want to take that into consideration. It's still in region, as far as I'm aware as well, but you'll want to take that into consideration. Additionally, they don't have out-of-the-box quarantining, and there's just a little bit of extra setup if you want to customize it a little bit. With our own solution, we have made it a point to complement Guard Duty and extend it. So if you need to scan files larger than 5 gigabytes, for example, we can do that all the way up to 5 terabytes in size. Along with that, we stand up scanning agents in your own AWS accounts. So you manage everything. It's in your own AWS account. We can't see it. We don't have access to the files, so on and so forth. But yeah, Guard Duty is a really nice native tool if you just need to scan a few gigs. And it's I mean, they build it for the masses. So if you have simple scanning needs, it's decent overall. Yes?
Could you walk us through what had happened with the code finger or the ransomware that originated from the cloud storage?
Sure. So CodeFinger was discovered in January of this year by a company, I believe, called Halcyon Labs, if I'm not mistaken. And what they released was research on someone obtaining compromised AWS credentials, so account credentials, which is fairly rare, but it's still a threat. It still can happen. And somehow bypassing MFA, or if someone ignored adding MFA, that's specifically what they focused on. But someone getting access to those credentials, logging in, and getting onto an AWS account that has the permissions to execute commands using AWS CLI, and then essentially locking up all of the individual objects in a bucket using customer provided keys. So they have the key on their side, they lock up all your objects in that bucket, and then all they do is leave you a little ransomware text file in the bucket. You realize you can't access your objects, you see this text file, and you gotta pay them some money. That was something that came out. Can it happen? Most likely. It could, definitely. Is it happening? We don't see it as much. You're mostly seeing actual ransomware, in the object itself. But it was an interesting, an interesting way of thinking about it, where you have this functionality of customer provided keys, so you can manage your own keys, but it can be weaponized. So that's the basics of it. We actually have a paper on, if you go to cloudstoragesecurity.com, we have a paper that covers CodeFinger in depth as well. Yes?
When it comes to misconfiguration risk in particular, do you find in your experience with your company that clients that rely heavily on infrastructure as code to provision these storage buckets are able to mitigate that for the most part, or like at least respond when it happens and update their IAC to prevent it from reoccurring?
So yes, that has been something that we've noticed they do a little bit better on. However, I've also noticed that usually it's kind of one way or the other. Either they're really, really, really knowledgeable and they do it the right way, or even if they're using IAC, it still kind of breaks things and opens things up. The biggest thing that we've noticed, though, is human error is big at the end of the day. AWS is so large, and across all of the hundreds of services, a lot of folks are not knowledgeable on every single aspect of a specific service, like S3 even though it's simple, even though it's existed for almost 20 years, the way you can configure it, so on and so forth, it's tough. And, it can get bad sometimes. Yes?
Why aren't you just logging SSCC encryption on the buckets? Like, that just stops the whole attack.
It does,
Right.
indeed. Not many do that, though, for some reason.
Yeah, they do.
Do they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something you can configure really easily. That's why that ransomware is just not seen.
Yeah, it's from what we found, well, I shouldn't be saying this, but I think we were not blocking it from our side. So from what we found, though, it's just human error at the end of the day. That it just happens. But that's a good point, very good point. Any other questions? Yeah, anybody? I will take that as a no then.